And now, of course, you've got, townhouses as low as 60, 70 square metres being built.
Yeah.
I think it's a great change. I mean, I think if you can buy a townhouse as you point out, in these suburban centres that, gets you an entry into suburban living, might even be freehold, but potentially a unit title, and that can be a fantastic way to get into the market. I mean, you can only sleep in one bed every night.
That's right.
You don't need to have 5 bedrooms.
That's right.
Welcome to the LoweDown, Wellington's #1 real estate podcast. I'm here with my good friend Adam, investor, real estate agent, and my mate. And we're here to talk about the Wellington apartment market and really what the apartment market is like for buyers, particularly investors and first-home buyers, and what's going on in the future
Apartments,
with apartments.
Craig.
Your favourite?
Apartments. A lot of people hate apartments.
Yeah.
Well, obviously not everyone, but
Yeah.
I get asked over the years. I've been asked so many times, do apartment prices ever increase? I mean, this is obviously investors, but I suppose anyone who's buying a property, they know that over time the property market increases over time generally, and they want to, if they're going to be in that market, they want to be a part of that increase. And do apartment values increase over time? So, do they?
I mean, the research I've done on it says that apartments, which I think there's some logic to this, apartments will appreciate over time, but not at the same rate as houses and freehold houses in the suburbs. So, obviously there's a whole raft of reasons why that is. And it appears that the apartment market, not only does it not appreciate quite as quickly, it's also a little more volatile as well, so perhaps a little more risky.
Yep.
And I think that's driven, of course, because the supply side of the equation can change so dramatically with the cycle. So you get a lot of building.
I think there is a component of the demand also waxing and waning a little more than traditional homes, but I agree it's vast. The majority of that is the supply, because of course when an apartment, if you're building houses, you might build 1 or 2 or 15, but if you're building apartments, you're not going to build 1. You're building 100.
There's another reason. I agree with that entirely. There's another reason in Wellington specifically, but perhaps it's true of all major cities, but certainly Wellington. The city's imploding on itself. You've got, your inner city suburbs, and we're constrained with one exit north, really, and so your inner city suburbs, the land supply is just constrained. So, it's not like you can continually increase the amount of houses for sale in the suburbs to keep prices lower, whereas actually in the city, there is no shortage. And I talk to developers and they say there will never be a shortage of places to build in Wellington, like if they want to. There's always older buildings that need to get torn down, and then
there's
newer ones become old.
Plenty of runway ahead of us.
Heaps
on
of runway,
that.
right? So the supply side is not as constrained when the boom times do come.
Yeah.
They can just almost all the brand new supply of real estate is apartments in Wellington, right?
Oh gosh. Wellington region?
Wellington City.
In the city.
Yeah. Because that's where we are.
Certainly central. Yeah, obviously in the city itself. I mean, it's vast. The vast majority of apartments. Then you go a little bit further out, and it's townhouses. And you go into the suburbs, and there's still a lot of houses. I mean, if you look at the building consent numbers nationwide, the number of freestanding houses has only in recently been overtaken by townhouses. So it's the most popular construction is still freestanding houses, but in the city itself, that's right. And as you say, the amount of land available for freestanding houses, well, you have to go further out. So it's I don't know here. Don't want to stereotype, but I mean or typecast, but Porua, Hutt Valleys. Northern suburbs, Wellington,
there's more land.
Your Granada and all those sort of places, right?
Newland.
That's right. So there's availability there still for freestanding houses, but even those locations, when the market really gets cooking, and first home buyers in particular consider properties, or they're forced to consider properties that they wouldn't prefer. If they were able to, I mean, if everyone's given a choice, would you like an apartment, a townhouse, or a freestanding property? Vast majority of people will choose, I'll have a freestanding property, please, but not at any price. And so once the pricing forces them to consider things that are their choice, B or C, then the demand for townhouses and the like, even in the suburbs, really starts rocketing again, doesn't it?
I mean, if you look at the trend, I mean, that's a great point you make. And if you look at the next sort of 20 years, I mean, I would say, that trade-off that you're talking about, people like, being central or going further north, that's really going to be the decision that first-time buyers are going to have to make, isn't it? You say, hey, I either have to have, a half an hour to 45-minute commute, or if I want to be central city because I'm young and I'm either single or a couple, don't have any children yet, need a stepping stone. Apartment market is a good option, right?
Yeah, or indeed, you do have those smaller buildings that are, the residential flats as well. So that's like a halfway house, isn't it? You get a 2-bedroom, 60, 70 square metre flat, maybe cross lease, maybe unit titled in a city suburb, as opposed to going
great point.
30 or 40 minutes.
I sort of in my mind, I kind of lump them together in a way. I know it's not quite the right way to think about it, but if you think, but really what we're talking about is high density. And, and obviously we know that, with the sort of housing crisis, so to speak, that's been loomed large in people's minds, and it became a huge political issue. Government is obviously trying to free up, reduce the red tape around high density development, which will make a big difference to how things shape up in the next up cycle, right? Like right now, developers are pretty inactive, but that'll change as the market changes over the next sort of 6, 7, 8 years. And so at some point, the shape of what is available to buy new will be quite different than what it was 10 years ago. I would say. I
mean, I hope these rules really do take effect in terms of shaping the housing landscape, and I personally think we do need more density around the transport spines and so on, because the cost of rolling the infrastructure out for new housing is massive, and we've got these incredibly competing kind of objectives, don't we? We want good quality of living, we want good quality houses, but we want affordable houses. Well, these things are not compatible, really,
Well, there's a tension.
There's a tension there. So to make them as compatible as possible, to make it as achievable as possible to get all of the above, surely we need to be building smaller, higher density accommodation around the service hubs, around the suburban centres where you've got your transport links and your other infrastructure like shops, leisure facilities, be it pools and cinema and so on. But also just the physical infrastructure of, we've got a problem with our pipes, right? So let's make use of the ones we've got rather than building a whole lot more that we won't maintain in the future.
Even in the last 10 years that we've seen, developers used to build sort of 120 to 160 square metre townhouses.
Or apartments.
Yeah. And now...
200 square metre apartments, 300 square metre apartments.
Yeah.
How do they go in the market now?
Yeah. They're tough to sell.
They are tough to sell.
Yeah. And now, of course, you've got, townhouses as low as 60, 70 square metres being built. Yeah. I think it's a great change. I think if you can buy a townhouse as you point out, in these suburban centres, that gets you an entry into suburban living, might even be freehold, but potentially a unit title, and that can be a fantastic way to get into the market. You can only sleep in one bed every night.
That's right.
You don't need to have 5 bedrooms.
That's right.
So, reality is when you're young, you're a couple with pre-children or even with one child, these are great stepping stones into the market. And if that increases the supply, which creates an element of, or sort of relieves some pressure on the overall market during the boom times, I think it's a fantastic change. I really do. We don't want capital gains in the real estate market to get out of control to the point that Wellington City is impossible for people, completely out of reach. It's just not good for society.
I don't think the market allows that to happen.
Well, I don't know. It really depends on the population growth, doesn't it? And the depth of the other kind of markets. I guess for argument's sake, you look at Manhattan or like the extreme examples where cities have just grown and grown and grown and grown, and you just have to go further and further and further out. So you want to live in certain parts of Paris, New York, LA. You're just not going to be able to afford it, are you?
That's right. But it's always been the case that the most desirable things, the most desirable products of any kind are the most expensive. And so if people, continue to want to live in the CBD, then, that comes at a premium. And so you get the whole spectrum, don't you?
Yeah, and it does, and it's a good point you make, because it does. Of course, no one wants to be the first to have to live further out, but it does increase. The more people and the more population you get in the outer areas, the cooler the outer areas get as well, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it actually does creates whole new suburban areas and new gentrification that actually drives, But it's I think the point about Wellington is it's hard to do that in Wellington. It really is. There is a big trade-off. I mean, I love it up the coast. I mean, I can see that as being really attractive, and as those areas develop, that's great. But if you end up having to go, Horowhenua, even further north, because over the 20 or 30 years, it just gets even unaffordable up the coast and north. I mean, that
so people will be trading off. If it's unaffordable in the city and they need that yard, that garage, and so on for the kids or whatever, and a bigger house and all that, then they're trading off, aren't they? I will, for my budget, I will get that, but the price I pay is my commuting. And as soon as they have more resources and whatever, as soon as they can afford it, they've got the option. Well, I upgrade where I am and get more of those good things I like, or I can maybe afford the same size property closer to town, and I'm paying the price in dollars and paying less of a price in terms of the commute and my time and so on. You mentioned before, interestingly, about the pressures of population growth, right? There are plenty of places around New Zealand where the population has not grown. What's the prices done in those locations?
You tell me. Sounds like you've done the research.
Well, you ambushed me last week.
That's right.
So I haven't got this with me, but the prices in those locations have gone up, just on average, just like they have the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So it's not. The population growth isn't the biggest driver by any means of house prices, because the places that have not grown in population have still doubled in value, in the 10, 12 years or whatever the case might be.
I mean, it seems hard to imagine that without increased demand, that over time that you're going to get the same level of capital gain as you do with an increasing population. I mean, because that just puts huge pressure on the demand side, doesn't it?
Of course, but it's the interaction of demand and supply that determines the pricing, isn't it? It's not just the demand side. So,
great point.
You just get less supply availability, and I think one of the major things is, because a lot of times people also say to me, well, to resolve this housing affordability crisis, all you need to do is provide more houses. But who's going to do that? If the houses cost more to provide, then you're going to realise when you sell them. No one. Well, maybe the government should do that. So the taxpayer should fund these losses in the properties just for the greater good of getting the house prices down. It's a very complicated problem to solve. But so my point is that I think one of the major drivers of house prices is the cost of production, quite simply. And we're talking about apartments here, and we talked about supply of apartments waxing and waning much more than traditional freestanding houses. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, is that when the market slows down, the value comes back, but the cost of production doesn't. Yeah. So the cost of production continues to rise, and then but the value of the end product comes backwards until there's sometimes no margin, sometimes a negative margin. So it costs more to produce these things than they'll get when they're selling them. In that environment, naturally, a developer is going to produce precisely none until the supply constraint again bites and the increase in demand comes and brings the prices back up again to create that margin again. And then you get the apartment market then, bringing on some new supply. Of course, there's a major lag, because it takes years for a developer to take their site, get planning permission, get construction going. That's several years. So by the time they've finished, the market can be quite different. Of course, that lag in supply continues to put prices continue to rise for longer than might otherwise be the case, because it takes so much longer for the supply to come on stream. That's why you get these big spikes and then a bigger troughs as well in the apartment market. Yeah.
So if you were a first home buyer, or say an investor, start with first home buyer. The apartment market we've established is a bit more volatile. perhaps the capital gains are not as great over the long term, but there are capital gains to be had. What would you say to a first-time buyers looking at the apartment market? What would you advise them?
I would advise them go for it. If you like central living, if you want to be in the city, and that's going to suit you for a period of time. I mean, I wouldn't advise anyone to buy any property, and plan to sell it in a year's time. So presumably they're thinking at least sort of 5 years. But if that's going to suit their lifetime for a reasonable period of time like that, then go for it. I mean, just get used to, I suppose, the process of due diligence with an apartment is a bit more complicated than it is with a traditional house. I mean, in part, that's just because it's forced upon the management of buildings to actually be more organised than your traditional couple or family is with their own home. I mean, who sits down when you've got your freestanding house and says, right, let's draw up our long-term maintenance plan now, darling. Let's get a 10-year maintenance plan going here, and let's create a sinking fund to cover the costs of that. I'll tell you how many people do that. Precisely none.
Yes.
And they handle it by, when the roof caves in and finally explodes and needs to be replaced, they borrow a bunch more money. They go back to the bank and they borrow $30,000. It's just way more organised than that with an apartment building, because it has to be under the Unit Titles Act. I suppose with an apartment building, you obviously you've got your body corporate committee, you've got your body corporate levies and so on. And we've talked about this in another episode of the podcast that the body corporate levies are often seen by people as completely dead money. That money isn't paying for nothing.
Yeah,
that is paying for insurance. It's paying for maintenance of the building, and not just routine maintenance like the washing of it, the cleaning of the carpets.
And you don't want one that's too cheap.
No. I mean, obviously, no one wants to spend more money than they need to, but too cheap can mean big surprises down the line. Because I've got news for you: running a building ain't free. This stuff costs money. So it's and if you've got on your team a body corporate committee that has people in it that are commercially, savvy, commercially sensible, with some good contacts perhaps in the building industry, that is a massively useful resource to have on your side, so that when the roof does need work, it's not you running around, flapping over it. It's a team of people who've got it under control and presumably have been looking at it for the last several years. So it's really important just to check out that the body corporate is being run sensibly, being run commercially.
So read all the minutes.
Yeah, and if you don't understand all that stuff, because I mean, if you're new to it, then a lot of people won't understand it. Just get some advice from someone who's done it before.
But you should try, right? So get your lawyer to look at it, and you should also read all of it, and then look at your lawyer's advice, because that's how you learn.
Yeah,
and I think that's...
Well, not just your lawyer, but also maybe someone who's an experienced property person, someone who's bought and sold a number of apartments, someone who's an investor and owns a bunch of them, can help you look out for what's important. But like you say, you don't want it too cheap, so you want the body corporate to be across their job. Do they know what's coming up in terms of costs for the building? And is that being accounted for? Because you don't want to spend too much, but you also don't want massive surprises to crush your budget down the line.
What about new versus old? I mean, if someone's entering the apartment market, they say, can't afford a house in the suburbs, quite happy to live in an apartment for 5 or 6 years before you perhaps have a baby and then move out into the burbs then as a stepping stone, would you say they should be looking at brand new apartments or older apartments, or do you have any sort of...
Again, it's horses for courses, I think, Craig. I mean, the lower risk stuff is the newer, of course, because it complies with all the more modern regulations, earthquake resilience, that sort of thing. Mind you, earthquake resilience, a lot of a bunch of the newer buildings have done terribly. So I personally think the jury's still out on that stuff. But in terms of your ease of getting your finance and your ease of predictability of running costs of the building,
the first 5 or 6 years are going to be a lot cheaper, right?
The newer stuff is way lower risk, but for that reason, it's much more expensive to buy. That certainty comes at a price.
It does, yeah.
You pay for it one way or the other.
Yeah.
But if you want that the greater certainty and the greater ability to borrow the money, then newer purpose built is good. I also personally think that some of the older stuff that's been around for a long time, not like 1990s, but maybe 60s or 70s in the suburbs or the lower rise buildings, I personally think they are quite good too, as long as they've been run well. They are not overly expensive to run on the body corporate, that sort of thing.
What about as an investor? What would you advise an investor? Do you think they make good investments? Would you buy an apartment as a rental property? I assume you have.
I have. Yep. I've got three. I've got 3 apartments. I mean, like with any investment, I think it's all about the cash flow. So as long as the cash flow works, then it's okay. As long as there are, you've got a check on these major risks like your earthquake resilience, your leaky building. But a big one also is the quality of like I said before, the quality of the body corporate committee. If you've got a body corporate committee made up of clowns, that's like a total albatross around your neck, because changing it is hard work. If you've got a committee that are savvy and commercially sensible, then that's really useful, because it's very, very easy to own an apartment. It doesn't eat your time like a house can. Yeah.
Do you think yield calculations? It's more important. I mean, obviously with multi-flat stuff or villas in the suburbs, you can kind of just look at a gross yield and use it as a rule of thumb. I think with apartments, it's a bit harder to do that because obviously your fees can be so different from one building to the next.
Yep. Insurance premiums especially. You get some of these lovely character buildings, but they are extremely expensive to maintain. So we've seen not even large apartments, haven't we? 2-bedroom apartments, 80, 90 square metres, something like that, where the body corporate levies are well into the 20,000s,
And I did see some stuff online from Opus Partners, I think it was, to credit them. They did some quite good research on apartment yields and showed that apartments actually had a higher return, on a cash flow return, than houses.
Gross yield. Yeah, well that would make sense. That would make sense. I mean, a larger proportion of an apartment's value is the actual bricks and mortar. A relatively smaller portion of the value of an apartment is in your share of the underlying land. That is not the case with a freestanding house. How much yield do you get from your section? None. How much yield do you get from the bricks and mortar? All of it. So if you got all your value in the bricks and mortar, or a larger percentage of the value in the bricks and mortar, then yes, on average, the yield is going to be higher in an apartment than in a house.
Another way of saying exactly the same thing is you're not paying for the land when you buy the apartment, or as much of it, and so therefore the value is lower, but it's still the same amount of bedrooms that you're renting out. Which is just another way of saying exactly what you just said in different words.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And so for that reason, you expect a higher yield.
And so for that reason also, you get more depreciation. There's more running costs with an apartment than there is with a house, relative to the value.
Yes, and
not on a gross dollars.
That's a great point, and that's exactly why perhaps the capital gain is not going to be as great, although the yield is greater.
Totally.
Capital gain over time, the building's going to depreciate. You don't have that appreciation of the land so much.
It is not the jibboard that is in short supply.
Yeah, that's right.
All except during COVID.
Yes,
it's the land that is of fixed supply. So with an apartment, obviously what you're doing is you're taking a section and you're dividing it amongst 50 dwellings, 80 dwellings, 20, 100, whatever the case might be. With a freestanding house, you own the whole thing. And often you'll look at it, if a house is really run down and it might be worth $1 million, the land is worth $800,000. For example.
Last point to wrap things up, Adam. Good time to buy an apartment now?
I mean, it's a good time to buy anything at the moment because prices have really come back. Interest rates are heading down. As interest rates come down, more and more people will be able to afford to borrow more. They'll get more confidence. I mean, picking when the next uptick is going to happen is very, very difficult. That's a fool's game. But I think we're bumping along the bottom at the moment. So if an apartment works for you, then if that suits your lifestyle, then go for it.
Take a medium-term view, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yep. Great, fascinating chat again,
Beautiful.
Adam. Really appreciate it.
Nice
that was LoweDown. Thanks again for listening, and please tune in next week. We'll do more of the same. Like and subscribe, and appreciate it.
See you next time.